Alright, so this is video 3.2, so it's the second video in our third unit. And today we're going to go over factoring. Factoring is the most important, definitely the most important thing we're going to go over this year. We'll need it for basically the rest of the year. So take good notes here so you can refer back to them all year. Unfortunately, this is not going to be, our factoring problems are not going to be this easy, but there is a process called factoring out the greatest common factor, or GCF for short. And I just want to briefly recap how to factor out a greatest common factor for those of us that may have forgotten. So if you look at the problem on the left, what I mean by greatest common factor is I have three terms. I have 2x squared, I have a 4x, and I have an 8. I need to look and I need to take out what do those three terms have in common. And by what I mean by have in common, can I divide them both by 2? Can I divide them both by 3? Can I divide them all by 4? If you look, I can divide all three of these by 2. What I'm going to divide by comes out of the parentheses, and then what's going to go inside the parentheses is what's left over after I divide all these by 2. So 2x squared divided by 2 is x squared. 4x divided by 2 is 2x. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. So when I'm factoring out the GCF, all I'm doing is dividing all three terms by that factor that I'm taking out. If you look at my second example here, all three of them, I can divide all three of these numbers by 3. So since I'm going to factor out a 3, I'm going to divide 3x squared by 3, 12x by 3, and 9 by 3. So in the steps that we're about to copy, when I'm referring to factor out GCF, you're just taking out the largest number you can that all the terms have in common. Alright, pause your video and just copy these down. I'm not going to read over them. I'm going to go through them in three examples on the next slide. But make sure these are copied down so when I reference them, you know what I'm talking about. Alright, so here's our actual factoring problems. So those steps you just wrote down, it tells me to multiply A times C. So my A value is right there. So A times C is 8. 8 times 1. What I mean by factor tree is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to list all factors of 8. 8's a good number because there's only two different sets of factors. So by factor tree, I'm just saying what numbers multiply to 8. So 1 times 8 is 8, 2 times 4 is 8, so I just list those out. Now it tells me to choose factors that add to b. Well, my b value is 6, so since my b value is 6, I'm going to choose 2 and 4 because 2 plus 4 is 6. So in my factor tree, I'm having to choose the set of factors or the pair of factors that can combine to my b value, in this case 6, so I'm going to choose 2 and 4. Now I'm going to rewrite 6x. So instead of 6x, I'm going to put plus 2x plus 4x, not plus 24, plus 4x plus 8. So I took 6x and I broke it up into 2x and 4x because those are the two factors that I chose from my factor tree. So I haven't changed my equation at all. I've just rewritten 6x to be 2 plus 4. Then it tells me to group the first. Tells me to group the first two and second two terms. and then it tells me to factor out the GCF. Only in the set of parentheses. So my first set of parentheses is x squared plus 2x. So I need to factor out what they both have in common. They don't share a number in common, but they do both have an x. X squared divided by x is just x. 2x divided by x is 2. Over here I have 4x plus 8. There I can divide both those numbers by 4. 4x divided by 4 is x. 8 divided by 4 is 2. Now here is a very key step. What's in parentheses should match. So if you look, after I factor out my GCF, in both parentheses I have x plus 2. If you do this process factor by grouping and you do not have the same thing in both parentheses, you're wrong, and we need to go back up to the step before this and figure out what happened. Then it tells me when I actually write my factors that my first factor is what happens twice. And what I mean by what happens twice is I have x plus 2 twice. The second factor is what's outside the parentheses. So I have x and a 4. And that's my factored form. So when we factor, we're going to multiply a times c, choose factors from my factor tree that add to b, then rewrite b as the addition of those factors that I chose, factor out my GCF, and then write my actual factors. And the answer to this question is what I boxed. Alright, so same thing here. So I'm going to multiply a times c. That's a terrible b, but oh well. So a times c is 20. So 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. Now again, I need to choose factors from my factor tree that add to b. In this case, my b value is 9, so I need to choose values from my factor tree that add to 9. So if I look, hopefully we know that 4 plus 5 is 9. So I'm going to come over here, and I'm not going to write 9x anymore. I'm going to write 4x plus 5x, because those are the factors that I chose. And then I'm going to group the first two and group the second two. If I look at 2x squared plus 4x, I can divide both of those by 2. And both of those have an x, so I'm going to take out or factor out a 2x. 2x squared divided by 2x is x. 4x divided by 2, x. Well, 4 divided by 2 is 2. X divided by x is 1, so it's just x plus 2. If I look at my second set of parentheses, I have 5x plus 10. Both of those I can divide by 5. So 5x divided by 5 is x. 10 divided by 5 is 2. I have the same thing in both parentheses again, so that means I didn't mess up. My first parentheses is what happens twice. My second parentheses is what's outside, so 2x plus 5. And again, my factor is my answer is what's boxed. Last one, and the process is the same every time. All right, so my A, B, C. So my A times C is 12, so my factor tree is going to be a 12. So I have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. I need these to add to negative 4. Now if you look, none of these, 1 plus 12, 2 plus 6, 3 plus 4, none of those is negative 4. So I'm going to have to get fancy here. And I have to decide which of these factors can I combine using positive and negative to get negative 4. let's look at 2 and 6. 6 minus 2 is positive 4, but 2 minus 6 is negative 4. So when I break up my b value of negative 4 using 2 and 6, my 6 needs to be negative.
I didn't understand that.
Okay, so when you look right here, these need to add 2x minus 6x have to add to negative 4. So if you're breaking this up and don't look back up and it add to negative 4, stop and pick different factors. So the two values that I break up need to add to b. So now I group the first two. Make sure this negative sign hangs out with the 6. That negative matters. So keep the negative sign in parentheses with that 6x. So if I look at my first two terms, they both have an x. X squared divided by x is x. 2x divided by x is 2. This is just a coincidence that they all end up x plus 2. In the second two terms, I can take out a 6. However, I never want that first term to be negative. If you look at my first set of parentheses, I don't have negative x plus 2. I have x plus 2. Okay, so if you notice, I added some black stuff to this equation. I thought that said negative 12 when I typed it, but I accidentally typed positive 12. So go back up to the equation. Change that to x squared minus 4x minus 12. Minus 12. And then in my parentheses here, I have minus 12. Sorry about that, but I don't have time to go remake the whole video real quick. If you look at both of these, I can divide both of these by 6, and they're both negative, so I'm going to factor out a negative 6. Negative 6x divided by negative 6 is x. Negative 12 divided by negative 6 is positive 2. Again, I have the same thing twice. So my first factor is x plus 2. And my second factor, see I have a negative 6 here. That just means it's going to be x minus 6 in parentheses. And my fault on the 12, I didn't notice until we were about halfway through the problem. So just make sure you have that negative in both spots. The things that I changed to black ink and right now I'm highlighting in pink, make sure you change that from the original problem you copied. Sorry. Alright, so that's factor by grouping. It's 3 examples. We'll do a couple more in class. Before I let you work, we're going to do this for 3 or 4 days. And again, this is a fundamental concept of Algebra 2 and Algebra 1. So we really need to have this down.